Talk about a way to escape reality for a while. The annual comic convention offered plenty of out-of-this-world excitement, including far-out comic books, souvenirs, and even futuristic-looking Star Wars computer games. Many were there just to expand their comic book collections, while others were there just to gaze at the galaxy of characters on hand.
Welcome to this special San Diego Comic-Con episode of Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. With the Comic-Con quickly approaching, it's a great time to explore its origins, which happen to be pretty Jewish. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios.
We're excited to talk with Mathew Klickstein, a pop culture historian and author of See You at San Diego, an oral history of Comic-Con, Fandom, and the Triumph of Geek Culture, and Gus Krueger, an art director and designer for the theme park industry and son of Comic-Con co-founder Ken Krueger. Matthew and Gus, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Thank you for having us.
Well, it's great to be here.
So I understand that you guys are doing an oral history of the San Diego Comic-Con on July 23rd. What's that all about?
So, of course, we've already actually done the oral history now twice. We did a podcast series for SiriusXM, although they partnered with us to produce it, and they were great and really helping it to become a very substantive. I don't even really like to call it a podcast. It's more of an audio docuseries called Comic-Con Begins. It's available everywhere for free, so whether people are listening to it on Spotify or anywhere else, they can listen to it there. We did that in 2020, and then we adapted that into this huge encyclopedic 500-page book called See You at San Diego that Fantagraphics put out in 2022. So we've done the oral history now twice. We've also done a few other smaller projects, and we're looking also into developing a documentary that we've been putting together for the last couple of years as well. And with all that in mind, we thought it would be great to do an actual live event. Again, we've done similar live events before in other places, but we've never actually done one at Comic-Con proper. And we just felt it was time to really make that happen. And Gus, who's the son of Ken Krueger, one of the co-founders of Comic-Con, as you noted in the introduction, is generous enough to come and join us. And we have about 6 or 7 other, what we like to call Comic-Con OGs, people who either also, like Ken, helped to create Comic-Con, but also a few other people who were just there in the early days who helped to kind of shape it into, it's hard to say what it is today, but definitely the original spirit of Comic-Con back when it was a little smaller, a little more intimate. And there's no question that they are all in their own ways kind of creators of what became Comic-Con. And people will be there at the panel, and we'll just talk about the old days of Comic-Con. People can tell stories. Audience members are encouraged to ask questions. And yeah, it's going to be great. It's free. It's open to the public. You do not need a badge to go to it. We are off-site. It's going to be about 5-minute walk away from the convention center in the Gaslamp district. For people who go to Comic-Con regularly and know San Diego, they know it's right there. It's basically a block away. And we're really excited about it. We're doing it at a place called Bards and Cards. And we're doing it on Thursday, July 23rd from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m.
That's such a short time frame.
In all fairness, they're actually giving us an hour and a half. And if you can believe it, a lot of the Comic-Con OGs speak even more than I do. So I wouldn't be surprised if we go a little bit longer. But that's the time that we've kind of put aside to do it because, and this is something we could talk about a little bit more, and people who go to Comic-Con know, there's so much that's happening at Comic-Con all the time. I'm literally going to be coming from a signing. We have a couple people on our panel who have to leave like right away because they've got another panel. One thing that, some people have some issues about what Comic-Con's become today, just how big, how loud, how overstimulating, how overwhelming, and in some ways, very, very commercial and that kind of thing. But one thing that hasn't changed is there's so many different cultures and passions that are represented, and there's a lot to do. So yeah, it'd be great to do something for 5 or 6 hours, but the reality is there's so many other things going on. And one other thing I do have to say, just because it's so important, anyone else who's tried to do something like this, we are extremely lucky and grateful to Bards and Cards that they're letting us do this at all, even for an hour, hour and a half. I'm not exaggerating when I say that all the other venues that I was calling that were a bit bigger or more public or that kind of thing, one of them asked for $100,000. Another asked for $50,000. Even the public library nearby wanted to do this, but they just, with budget cuts, they really had to charge. It would have been probably at least $10,000 for an hour or two, because these are places that are used to opening up space for activations and things for Marvel, for Universal, for these companies that have, millions and millions of dollars to blow on stuff like that. So, yeah, an hour might not seem like that long, but boy, I'm just grateful that we even get it all and that we got it for free, because none of us have any money, so we wouldn't have been able to pay $100,000 for it.
And Gus, you were there at the beginning with your dad. How do you feel about the way that it's become so commercial and so difficult to book these things? I think in the old days, it would have been a lot easier to have a panel like this.
Yeah, it's funny because my first Comic-Con, I was literally a baby. So my first Comic-Con was 1973, and I'm just a baby. My dad, he was the first chairman of Comic-Con, so he kind of was the guy that helped facilitate all that, but he also sold at the show. He was more of a bookseller than a comic person, but he had a shop that sold comics, and it's all in the book. I'm sure they'll cover it.
Including pictures of baby Gus there also.
Yeah. So it's funny because so many of my stories were just like, I'm just a little kid watching people do stuff, right? So I think Comic-Con has grown bigger because the acceptance of pop culture has grown bigger. And it's not, yes, in anything that grows bigger, there's corporations that want to make money on it. And that's the bottom line. These people are all there because the companies, are doing that. So for me, I think it's a natural progression of what it was. Unfortunately, I think because of that, there are certain aspects of what it was that, it used to just be like, it was a lot easier for people to just go and hang out with their friends and sit in the corner and like rummage through long comic boxes and just spend hours doing that. And now you spend hours trying to find a place with long comic boxes at the show. To be honest, it's a different thing. But I still go and I still like it. Although it is a very different experience, and I think that I'm just sort of very accepting of change in the way it is. So instead of bemoaning what it's not, I kind of just appreciate what it is. Having grown up around it, I just love going to San Diego. It's a great excuse every year to go to San Diego and sort of relive the feelings I had as a kid going to that and being able to go with my dad. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but just going makes me feel closer to him and to the event. So it's hot and cold the way I feel on it, but at the end of the day, I couldn't imagine missing it. I just could not. I've been fortunate enough to take my kids. Now they're 14 and 11, and I think they've maybe missed 2 cons their entire life. Like, I've been able to take them and bring them up in this, so their impression of what Comic-Con has become is going to be totally different than what mine is. But yeah, I'm very zen about it, but I do realize that for a lot of people, it's a lot, man. It's a lot.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe.
I know that unfortunately, and Matthew, you might talk about this, but the Comic-Con itself isn't necessarily interested in its own history. So, Gus, do you get like a free pass, or do you have to sign up like everybody else?
I do. I'm fortunate enough to have been, through my father, I was able to get into one of their gold badges is what they call it. But I do have that. So I'm able to take care of myself and my family. So I don't have that, but I have the same issues. Like, I have to worry about my hotel. I'm on my own. Like, the only thing I don't have to worry about is actually getting into the show, because they call it as a always approved professional. That's their designation for it, which is great because I don't have to worry about credentials and all of that stuff. But yeah, we're all still in the same fight. We've got to get, unless we're a guest of a certain level through the con, we've got to figure out our own hotels. We've got to do all this stuff. And luckily, I've been fortunate with the Comic-Con's hotel lottery system, so I've been able to get close. But I'm just like everybody else. I'm fighting to get into the offsites. I'm fighting to get anything else. But, there's that one perk, and I'm very grateful that I still have that ability to do so.
Gus makes a good point that there is that perk. I was going to say there are some perks. Really, it seems like it's just the one, that there is something called the gold badge that a few of the old timers are able to get, but also some of them don't. And it, even to an outsider like myself, sometimes feels a little bit arbitrary. And the other aspect of it that Gus just brought out is not only true for a lot of these people, but anybody. I mean, anybody will tell you that one of the hardest things about going to Comic-Con is finding a place to stay. Yeah, for those who didn't hear it, he used the word lottery. I mean, it's not just about paying for the rooms, which are extremely expensive, because all of the hotels and everything in the area, double, triple, quadruple their costs. But that's true with all the restaurants in the area, all the coffee shops. I mean, it's like going to, Coachella or some other big music festival or anything else. I mean, it's $7 bottles of water and $20 sandwiches, and every place has a specialty menu that they have just for Comic-Con. And I don't begrudge the businesses. I mean, more power to them. As we all know, it's difficult to keep independent businesses going, and to their credit, a lot of them are. It's not just chain restaurants and stuff there. As Gus said, one of the great things about going to Comic-Con is San Diego, especially downtown San Diego and Gaslamp, is so vibrant and eclectic. There's all different kinds of bars and restaurants, and many of them have been there for generations. I would say most of them are independent and are local. So it's not just a bunch of, Applebee's and things like that, which is a great part about going to Comic-Con. So, they're doing what they can to stay in business. I know for a fact that a lot of them, they make all their money for the year, during Comic-Con. During COVID, when all of this got shut down, it was really hard for the whole downtown area, not just because of COVID itself and everything else that was going on, but to not have Comic-Con for a couple of years was devastating to a lot of the businesses in that area, because that's what keeps them going. And I know a lot of them are still playing catch up from that from a few years ago. So it is difficult that even with a badge, it's very hard to go to Comic-Con.
Reflecting back on something that Gus was saying, and also, something I saw in the book, which is a really, wonderful oral history, is some people kind of described it as a religious experience and, wouldn't miss. Maybe Matthew, you can start by talking a little bit about, the Jewish connection that is sort of there in Comic-Con.
Well, there's definitely a Jewish connection to Comic-Con. The most obvious one is that some people didn't particularly like him. Some people did like him. Sheldorf, who's considered kind of number one founder, along with Ken and a few of these other people, just because he came from Detroit, where they were doing something called the Triple Fanfare, and that really was kind of the kernel that became the popcorn of Comic-Con, along with people helping out like Ken and Richard Alf and people like Scott Shaw and a few others that are still around, Dave Clark, Roger Friedman, and Mike Towery, and a few of these other people, most of whom will be on our panel, by the way. But Shell was, people would say, kind of like number one in his own way. And he was Jewish. He was a religious Jew. He had a religious funeral. They put the pebbles on the tombstone, the whole deal. He was going to synagogue at the end of his life, from what I understand and know. Gus, you might know better than I, but I understand he kind of stepped in and out. But by the end of his life, he definitely was very religious. And, so there's that Jewish connection. Also, kind of spiritually and on kind of the celebrity side, at least in the early days, a lot of people would say that there were probably three visionaries in the industry, so to speak, who really helped to support and inspire Comic-Con at the very beginning. And that was Jack Kirby, Ray Bradbury, and Forrest Ackerman. And of those three, Jack Kirby and Forrest Ackerman were Jewish, and particularly Jewish. It's one of the things that, is really strong about Jack Kirby's legacy, is his connection to Jewish culture and everything else. And of course, his connection to another very prominent Jew in the community, Stan Lee. Although Ray Bradbury was not Jewish, he's like Gus and some of these other folks, kind of an honorary Jew, just because so many of his friends growing up were Jewish, and he was very close with people like Forey Ackerman and many of these others. So yeah, there was always a lot of Jewish culture in Comic-Con, not to mention just the staples that really helped to create the pop culture machine of Comic-Con early on, all Jewish. Rod Serling for Twilight Zone, again, Kirby and Stan Lee, obviously the Superman boys, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, all these various people. I mean, comics itself really came out of, Italian and Jewish young boys, and a few gals in New York and certain places in the Midwest. But there's a lot of Jewish heritage there, as well as the science fiction world and the pop culture world that really helped to spawn the fandom that drove Comic-Con and that propelled it. So yeah, there's a lot of Jewish DNA in Comic-Con and in fandom writ large and in pop culture writ large. And I think it's important that we don't forget that, and we support and acknowledge and recognize that as well.
Yeah, two people who are featured very prominently in the oral history that come to mind of Jewish persuasion are Trina Robbins and Lloyd Kaufman. And certainly when I was younger and the Comic-Con was different back in the early 90s, the Lloyd Kaufman table was the place to go. That was kind of the centerpiece of the whole event for me. I don't know if it still has that place. I know he still goes there. What's the vibe around Lloyd Kaufman at Comic-Con these days?
Lloyd is a very emblematic of some of the changes that we've been talking about and that we discuss a lot in the podcast, in the book, that we'll talk about in the panel. Again, I try to be very diplomatic about the way that I talk about this. But the reality is that anybody could say, look, Comic-Con started with 100 people, then 300 people, then thousands of people, and now it's hundreds of thousands of people. It brings in more revenue every year than the Super Bowl, as far as advertising and that kind of thing is concerned. So it's, of course, a very different beast than it was back in the day. And as Gus said, and he's right, look, there's going to be changes that are going to happen whether we like it or not. We can't not do that. I mean, they can't hold Comic-Con at, a little hotel basement again anymore. That's not going to work, obviously. So there have been a lot of changes that happen. And part of that is people like Lloyd Kaufman, who was really an early adapter to Comic-Con back when the film studios didn't come, back when there really wasn't a lot of Hollywood or film, even independent film like Lloyd, presence and representation there. It is a misconception for people who think that Comic-Con used to just be about comic books, and hey, it used to be about comic books. Why isn't it about comic books anymore? Well, from day one, it was always about everything. And that's really important to remember. Gus said his first Comic-Con was in 1973. Comic-Con started in 1970. By 73, there already was special areas just for Star Trek, for example. There's science fiction, there's King Kong, there's Universal Monster movies, there's animation, Chuck Jones, June Foray, Bob Clampett. It was always about all these different kinds of things. But, the film studios didn't have the same kind of representation that they have there now, or what some people would say, and somewhat rightly so, kind of dominating the Comic-Con in the way that they have over the last few years. Lloyd was kind of this early guy to come in with Troma Films, Troma Studios, Troma Entertainment. And so it was really exciting for people to have, hey, now there's, more movie people coming and that kind of thing. So he was a bit of a godhead at Comic-Con, in the early 80s and that kind of thing. It was very exciting for him. And as he put it, every year they kind of pushed his table back and back and back and back. And now, when he does his panel about Troma, it's Saturday night, which anybody who knows the Comic-Con cycles is not really a great time. A lot of people are already going home. A lot of people are burned out from doing it for a few days. A lot of people are at parties and things like that. Saturday night is kind of a booby prize night. And I've been to the panel. I've been on the Troma panel. Yeah, you're lucky to have, maybe 50 people come. And it used to be maybe 500 people would come. The point, though, that Lloyd makes that I think is important, not just for Troma, but for that kind of thing, is those 50 people who come really love Troma. So it might not be the quantity, but it's the quality. So he's still grateful that he gets to go to Comic-Con every year. But yeah, he's got a tiny little booth that's hard to even get into, that's sort of smushed into this area with a bunch of other horror film stuff and whatnot. And he used to have much grander representation there. And, he's one of the people who's kind of gotten shoved a little bit to the side. But he still goes and he still gets to do his panel. And there are people like yourself, Jonathan, and others who go to see Lloyd. There's always a long line. So the people who want to be there for Lloyd and Troma are there. And he definitely gets the love there. It's just kind of in a little tiny corner now, where it used to be a much broader space that's now been taken over by, Disney and Universal and everything else, and Netflix and whatnot. What can you do? Amazon.
Well, as it happens, producer engineer Mike Tomren and I were there. We saw a preview showing of Sergeant Kabuki NYPD, and that was a very kind of seminal Comic-Con experience for me.
They did allow Lloyd to be part of the Toxic Avenger remake panel that was in Hall H, where, for people who don't know Comic-Con, that's where like the big events happen, where you have your Robert Downey Jr.'s and your James Gunns and such. And it is very overwhelming. It's huge. There's metal detectors outside. There's lines that go for 3 or 4 hours just on that one day, let alone other times and whatnot. It's like the big arena. It's called Hall H in part because it's Hollywood. And so Lloyd's up there on the panel with Peter Dinklage and with Elijah Wood and Kevin Bacon and writer-director Macon Blair. He's on the Jumbotron and the whole thing. And as somebody who's worked with Lloyd and loves him and knows him and grew up on Troma and has worked with Lloyd and Troma for the last 20 plus years, it was really touching to see that. And you could tell from his face, and just I know him, that he was really honored to be able to be part of that. And even, if anything, actually a little overwhelmed, because it is very overwhelming. So Comic-Con did at least respect him in that regard. Although I will say, I think that had a lot more to do with the fact that it was Legendary Pictures that makes all those big movies and Godzilla and everything, less than that it was a remake of a Troma movie. But still, that was really cool to see that, and that Lloyd got to have that experience at Comic-Con.
Gus, do you think growing up around the early days of the Comic-Con and that creative energy might have led you to the career that you're in now?
I came to my career the weirdest way possible. I was studying like TV video. I kind of started working at Knott's as a Scary Farm as a monster because it was a fun gig for a bit. And I just it kept going and kept going. And now I'm so lucky to be able to create things that literally my job is to make things to make people have a good time. And that's crazy. And I think really I'm so fortunate to have had the family I had with my dad. Obviously, not only just Comic-Con, he was a member of First Fandom in like the 30s. His history in just sci-fi in books and even fanzines and just book selling is sort of what gave him all of that cred and just experience to be able to help these kids with this crazy idea of a convention, make that a reality. Growing up, I mean, a lot of people they go to Comic-Con and it's just this crazy big thing. And yes, I've seen it. I was with it from my infancy. I watched it from its infancy as I've grown up and old. It's certainly doing probably better in its old age than I am. But one of the things that people usually think, like, oh, isn't it strange to be around all these people? To me, it's perfectly normal. Strange is normal. Creative is normal. I read more comic books than anyone I knew because growing up, my dad wasn't even a big comic guy, but he did have a comic store when I was in. He went from having a bookstore that sold comics to just having a comic store while I was in high school. And I would ride my bike there every day after school to go help my mom, which really meant that I would go there and I would just read every comic I could. So I would be reading like 5 or 10 comics a day for my entire years. So I think it really just opened me up to always looking at things in a fantastical sense, in a creative sense. And I just love creating, and I don't always want to look at things the same way as everybody else does. It's just, I think if I just did normal stuff all the time, I'd be so bored. I would be so bored because I'm just so used to being surrounded by artists and creatives and weirdos that that's home. It's home for me. So maybe my coworkers don't really appreciate my silliness as much, but I have a great time. But that said, I was able to just take all of that, and everything I did, I tried to always create. When I was doing like student films, I was just creating. I just always wanted to find a way to be expressive and make something fun and make something that literally, this sounds hokey, but I just love making things that make people smile. I like to see people have a good time, and knowing that somebody had a good time because of something I created is amazing. Like, that's the best thing ever. And the fact that I've been so lucky as to be able to make a career of it, I can't even speak to that. But yeah, it's just, I mean, if you read every single thing that comes out, you just kind of, there's actually a comic character that like the flaming carrot, he got brain damage because he read too many comics as a kid. And I feel like that was my path. Like, I'm not shooting criminals or wearing a big carrot on my head, but um, I mean, given the right circumstances, I probably wouldn't be averse to either. Um, but um, but yeah, just growing up in that environment, seeing that this is such a great outlet, and it's for everyone, but it really is for the weirdos, because so many of us that see things a little differently, there's something in fandom to find a home in. And early years of Comic Con, that's so much what it was. There was a community, there was a brotherhood for people who saw things differently. Now it is more culturally acceptable to see things differently. Now we see everything differently, and now we fight about it, which is so much worse than, but that's a whole other podcast. Being exposed to all of that and seeing that people were able to create and just come up with these things, like literally, like I'm there. I think my dad published a comic that Scott Shaw drew about a turd, and that's what I'm reading at like 8. So everything's normal, everything's fine. There's no weird thing. I'm just like, yeah, that's normal. Oh, look, Dad made this comic at the last page. There's Santa's butthole. It's being so exposed to so much and such a wide community of people, and everybody accepting of everybody else. It's just so good for the soul that it just opens you up to anything is possible. I don't feel like there's a weird thing if you say like really dark humor, like whatever. I don't really find I don't have like, maybe that's a bad thing, but I don't really think like there's too soon. I don't think that, it's all just comedy and entertainment and finding ways to pull people out of the minutia and the reality that life can be really hard, and then you die. Well, let's have fun while we're here.
You bring up something really interesting about even the way that fan culture has shifted over the years. I think because of the online ecosystems that we all inhabit, it is sometimes said that no one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans. And, everything is a subject of debate, and there's that animosity. Does that spill over into the Comic-Con these days, or is it like a safe place, kind of a haven, a refuge from all that stuff?
I think there was more of a schism in the Twilight years.
Yep.
As in the movie, like, but I really think it's sort of now, people are just, it's so hard to be there that who has time to fight. I think all of the schisms at Comic-Con are like, this asshole just elbowed me in the nards, right? It's sort of like, wow, take a shower. It's not so much like your fandom's the worst, because everybody has an embarrassing fandom and everybody has a mainstream fandom. I think, from my experience, there are little things, little bits of pockets of people who really hate this or really hate that. But on the whole, I don't see any of that at Comic-Con. I really, Comic-Con and WonderCon, their smaller convention in Anaheim to an extent, I really just see it as a place where people can just go and be themselves. And that's what's great about it. Even all these years, it was people who felt like this is a safe space to be myself. And yeah, you could post online that you took a picture with a really embarrassing mascot or something, and somebody online's going to have something crappy to say in the comments, but who cares? That's going to happen all the time. But when you're there, for so many people, I think it just feels like home. And for me, it feels like home. I wish all those people weren't in my home. It kind of gets hard to move. But even in that chaos, I'm so used to it. And again, like I said, I worked as a monster at Not Scary Farm for so many years. So I'm used to like darting in and out of people, but I'm used to the crowds, and I kind of have this personal safety net that when I'm there, I can handle it. If I'm at Walmart, I can't handle that many people. But at Comic-Con, I'm sort of like, you've steeled up your resolve to go there. But yeah, I feel like it's a safe space for the most part. And any of that stuff is just on the periphery. I don't really think you get the whole Star Trek, Star Wars wars like you used to have. Because I mean, honestly, for me personally, I'm just exhausted by the fighting that happens every day in every aspect of our life. I just want to escape into a fandom and have fun. And I think for some people, that's what this is.
In Matthew, in your oral history, that's a common theme that comes up, especially in the earlier days as people were finding their tribe at the Comic-Con, and that was a way to not feel so much of an outcast, right? That was like the one time of year that the freaks felt normal.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, and Gus, I think that the way that you put all that was really poetic, and I was kind of sitting there listening, going, "Wow, there's a Jewish value, and there's a Jewish value, and there's a Jewish value." Just because of the theme of the show, I can't help myself but to realize you have this aspect of it being very Hamish, of it being almost have like a sense of being like a shtetl in a way, particularly Gus's father's store. This comes up in the podcast and the book, and it's one of the reasons why I always enjoy having Gus along for the ride, not just because of who his father was, but because of the store itself. I've always compared it without ever having been there, and I was born way after and whatnot. But from the stories people told me, the pictures and everything, it was like there's the CBGB to the punk world, or Woodstock, if you will, or the way that Silicon Valley became a hub for people who were interested in early computers. Ken's store, Gus's father's store, before there even was Comic Con, was in and of itself almost kind of a little Comic Con. It wasn't just a store where they were selling science fiction books and comic books and things like that. They would have people come and talk, and they would show little cartoons, and they like it was kind of its own little small event space, and it was very eclectic. It was like a little art center. Sometimes in the back of my mind, I think of it like one of these like kind of 1980s teen movies where it's like the rec center for all the kids to go to, and skateboarding, and they're smoking outside, and some of them are a little bit tougher than the others, but there's also the geeks and the nerds and all different kinds of people there. And that was the real spirit of Comic-Con. And let's be honest, there's a real Jewish cultural tradition there of tolerance and acceptance, and once again of the weirdos and the outsiders coming together. We Jews, we're not called the wandering Jews for a reason. There's a good reason that we're called that. And we had to kind of find our tribes, and we had to find our way and connect. Not to mention that we have a real history of, no one wants to do entertainment and vaudeville and such. Okay, I guess we'll do it because they won't let us do anything else. Oh, then that becomes big. No, well, we can't go to the country clubs and things during the summer. I guess we'll go up to the Catskills where no one is. Whoops, we turn that into something really cool. We go out to Hollywood. Whoops, now that's the big thing. It's like everywhere we go, it's no one else wants to do it. No one else cares about it. We kind of help to really get it going, and then it becomes this huge thing. And in some way, you could say that same thing kind of happened, not just with Comic-Con, but yeah, with Fandom. Gus was even talking about his father being part of First Fandom back in the 30s. What's considered really the first convention, it was more science fiction than comic books, is Worldcon in 1939, and one of the creators was a guy named Sam Mouskowitz. Hello. So we've always kind of been there, even back when no one wanted to be a nerd. No one wanted to be a weirdo. No one wanted to do these things. You had to hide it. You really did get beat up for reading comic books. Your teachers would say, oh, you can't read Ray Bradbury. You can't write a report about Lord of the Rings. That's not literature. These people did it anyway. And then now it's everything. And there's a certain Jewish thread there, if you don't mind my saying, again, more culturally than religious, and some of these other venues that we've been in it. So everything that Gus was just talking about that makes Comic-Con Comic-Con, yeah, sorry, I see it as a lot of Jewish values and Jewish culture there. And I think that that's really important, and partly why, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about all this on a show that is in part talking about Jewish culture and whatnot. It's exciting to see. And it is, the nerds got their revenge. The weirdos got their revenge. And for many of us, that's kind of the story of the Jews also. We were able to take over and run and do all these different things with Hollywood and with, this, that, and the other. And, when people say those kinds of things, sometimes it can come off as insulting or stereotypical, but I'm always like, that's pretty cool that we were able to do that, from nothing, and people didn't like us and shoved us away. And like, that's kind of neat that we were able to create these empires in that regard. That's nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed by. And now we see it in fandom and in Comic Con too. I mean, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were kids. They created Superman as a protector because they themselves felt very, oppressed and very small, and they needed a hero. They needed an Ubermensch to come and save them and their community. I mean, that's what so much of that's about. And Gus is right. It's bringing everybody together and having a place to be safe and and inclusive, and anybody can be anything. And that's been true since day one. When you flip through pictures of my book, you see all different kinds of people, and we talk about it. And whether it's LGBT or people from other countries or Mexico or different places in Asia or wherever it was, Comic Con was one of the first places to really promote manga and anime before anyone else even knew what that was. And artists who were from Black communities and Hispanic communities, that was there. That wasn't. They weren't getting on a bandwagon in the '90s. They were doing it when no one else was doing it, when it was a little dangerous to do it. And they came together and said, hey, we're going to all stick together here and make this happen. And we're all one in that regard because we love these different fandoms, and you're creating stuff and I'm creating stuff. And yeah, I'm sorry. I see something very Jewish in that aspect.
Any last things you guys got to plug about the panel and the things going on around the offsite Comic-Con oral history on July 23rd?
The panels are fun. It's funny for me because so many of the, I don't want to say old timers, but I'm not a young person either. I just go there to feel young. That's why Matt hangs out with us all, because he feels young. But no, those guys have such amazing stories. And even though in a lot of these things, I think the perspective I bring to these panels is just sort of like having seen it evolve. They're the ones with the crazy, colorful stories. They're the ones that were there. I just have been sort of the passenger along the way. And I think that's why Matt had me in the book. Number one, obviously my connection through my father, but still to get the insight of someone who grew up attending the convention. Yeah, it's really fun to hear these stories told from them and just sort of watch that. A lot of times I don't have a ton to add personally. I can always do color commentary and add my insight. And, if anybody asks, hey, what's your take on where it's come? I certainly have an opinion on that. And I certainly have watched that progression. And I even though I feel it's a natural progression, it's just like anything else. Things change and they're not always to the way we like them. But there's probably a bunch of 15, 20-year-olds out there that this is the best thing ever. Unfortunately, the way we experience the world isn't the way the world is always going to be. But to get back to the panel, I just love being a part of it. I love seeing everybody. I love hearing their stories. It's always good to see Nat, of course. But just to be a part of it, it brings me back to that. So if you want to hear just some real charming stories from people who have been there, people who have done some crazy shit, and people who have survived to tell the tale, it's got charm to it. It never gets dry like excuse me, but like a bunch of old fuddy-duddies like, well, back in my day. It never feels like that, because the back in my day that they're talking about, some of that stuff is bananas. Like the things that they did. Look what they created. Look at what they created. Look at the legacy of what this ragtag group of like 10 or 12 dudes did. And a couple girls too. I don't want to just say dudes.
Yeah, there's definitely gals.
Other gals for sure. And honestly, that's going back. Comic-Con was one of the first, not one of the first, but it was always open to everybody. The females brought more to the table, and it wasn't really a matter of now it's acceptable for girls. It always was. It's just that culturally girls didn't participate in that. And when they did participate in that, unfortunately, due to conventions of the time, not comic conventions, but conventions of society, they were told not to. So they weren't as forthcoming with that. So I'm just delighted that we're in a place where people can be forthcoming with what they like, and that we're still here. And thanks to Matt for getting this venue and making this like this happen, because I know we wanted to do it at first, but unfortunately, this isn't a panel that Comic-Con is interested in having at this point.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, Gus, and I think that that's something that people should know if they are interested in coming, because even though it's free, which is important to remember, even though you do not need a badge, and it is open to the public, yeah, people have a lot of opportunities to go to other things and see other things, and they might even be a little bit put off by an oral history. That sounds kind of boring. I want to go and watch things and play video games and this, that, and the other. Gus is 100% right. And I think it's the legacy again of this early group of fandom people and Comic Con. Pretty much every single person, certainly all the people who are going to be on our panel, but every single person who was involved in the early days of Comic Con, they went on to live out their dreams. Most of them, it's one of the reasons why a lot of them don't have a lot of money today is, they did not become lawyers. They did not become doctors. They did not become, handcuffed to desks and, work their way up to become, manager of pencil pushing at some big corporation that, that they hated their lives at. Almost every single person that we're talking about, almost every single person in the book and the podcast, I think to the exclusion of maybe like one or two, got involved, as Gus himself did, in theme parks, in toy design, and at really top levels, Hasbro and Mattel, and got involved with Hanna-Barbera, and were involved in film and television, and worked with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and even people who were on more of the commercial side and were doing more publicity and marketing. Well, they were doing it with David Lynch, and they were doing it with the people who did Blade Runner and this, that, and the other. And some of them still, even to this day, are still very much connected to those worlds. So the people who help to create Comic-Con are themselves creators, are artists, are writers, musicians, filmmakers, designers. So when you're coming to a panel like this, and it's one of the reasons I keep doing these kinds of things and really loved working on the book, is it's not just history about something really fun. The people telling the history, they're really fun. I love these people. It kills me that I never got to meet Ken, because I really like Gus a lot. Gus is a fun guy, and sometimes we have times where we get to talk over the phone just about other things, or meet up at Comic-Con as you do, and we don't even talk about Comic-Con. We just talk about other things. And I grew up going to Knott's Berry Farm and certainly Knott's Scary Farm, so I ask him questions about that. But all these people who are going to be on the panel, the point that I'm making, yeah, as Gus said, are not going to sit there and talk in all these technical terms, and they're way better at this than I am, is the point that I'm making. They tell really funny, really interesting, fascinating stories. And also they were a bunch of proto-punks and hippies. They pulled pranks, and there was a lot of naked swimming in the pool, and Timothy Leary came one year, and all that came with that. So they were a bunch of teenagers in the 70s, and take that for what it's worth. So to hear those stories is really exciting and fun, and to be able to do it at the thing, surrounded by the hundreds of thousands of people that now populate their little world that they had, that all came from Gus's father's bookstore, which, by the way, in the back sold some naughty magazines and such to actually pay the bills. Stories like that, even, that's part of the fun of it. So yeah, if people are coming to Comic-Con, come to our panel. It might be history, but it's really fun history. And the people telling it, they're really fun. I love hanging out with them. They are a lot of good times. And some of them will probably be stoned. So, there you go.
Hey, you're going to be in the gas lamp. It's right after lunchtime. Go out there, grab some lunch, come and check us out, and then get back in the show.
Yeah, 2 to 3 p.m. at Bards and Cards, right there in the gas lamp, Thursday, July 23rd. Again, it's free. It's open to the public. And we will be filming it too. Gus, I don't even know if you're aware, but Mike Catrone is going to film it. So not to say that should be a reason to miss it, because you got to be there live and in person. And audience members will have the opportunity to ask questions. Not only will there be books there for people to sign also, by the way, but people can bring other things, because some of the folks who'll be on our panel, again, are creators, and people might want to bring stuff to sign.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Gus and Mathew.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, Gus.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.